Zayden Novik gripped the steering wheel of his beat-up taxi as the rain sliced down like glass outside, the city lights blurring through the windshield. Midnight shifts were brutal, but he didn't have a choice. His daughter, Penny, was asleep 2 neighborhoods away with Mrs. Lowe, the retired teacher who babysat for cheap and always left the porch light on for him. Rent was due in 4 days, and the electric company had already left their final warning. He needed every dollar. That's when she stepped into his cab. He didn't see her face at first, just a blur of long dark hair, a soaked designer coat, and heels that probably cost more than his car. She slid into the backseat like she didn't belong in the rain. "Just drive," she said softly, her voice tired but firm. "Anywhere quiet." Zayden glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Her eyes were glassy, like she'd been crying. She didn't look drunk, she looked wrecked. "Sure," he said. "I know a place by the river. No crowds, you okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just needed to breathe." He pulled away from the curb, the meter ticking. She didn't speak for the next 10 minutes, and neither did he. Zayden was used to silence, used to people who didn't want to talk. But something about her, the way her fingers clutched her coat, the way she stared blankly out the window, made him want to say something. "Bad night?" he asked. "Worst," she said, then laughed, but it cracked halfway through. "Sorry, I'm not usually like this." "No judgment here," he said with a shrug. "This cab's seen everything. Breakups, proposals, even a woman who gave birth in the backseat once." That got a small smile from her. "Sounds like you've got stories." "Too many," he said. "But hey, you're not giving birth back there, right?" She let out a soft laugh. "Not tonight." He finally saw her face clearly as they passed under a streetlight. She was beautiful. Not the kind of beauty you see on magazine covers, though she definitely could have been, but the kind that felt out of place in a taxi at midnight. She looked like she belonged at some gala, not soaked and shivering in the back of a cab. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly. "Zayden," he said. "Zayden Novik." "Celia," she said after a beat. "Celia Jennings." "Nice to meet you, Celia Jennings," he said, "even if it's on your worst night." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something softened in her face. "You have kind eyes." Zayden chuckled, a little thrown. "Thanks, I got M from my kid. She's 4, thinks I'm a superhero." Celia blinked. "You have a daughter." "Yeah, Penny, smart as anything. Loves dinosaurs and thinks ketchup is a food group." That made Celia smile, a real one this time. "She sounds amazing." "She is," Zayden said, something warm creeping into his chest. "She's the reason I'm out here at this hour. Gotta keep the lights on." A silence settled again, but this one felt different, comfortable almost. He took her to a quiet overlook by the river, where the city skyline shimmered in the distance. She didn't get out, just sat there, staring, her hands finally relaxing. "You want to talk about it?" he asked gently. Celia shook her head. "Not tonight, but thank you for not pushing." "You're welcome," he said, turning off the meter. "You can sit here as long as you want, no charge." She frowned. "No, turn it back on." "It's fine, really." "I insist." Her tone was sharp, but her eyes were soft. "Let me pay you." Zayden gave her a long look, then turned the meter back on. She stayed for another 10 minutes, then finally asked him to take her back to her hotel. The Fairmont Grand. His stomach twisted slightly. That place had a valet line of Bentleys and black-tinted SUVs. What was someone like her doing in his backseat? When they pulled up, she handed him a wad of bills before he could stop her. This is way too much," he said, flipping through the stack. "Celia, this is like 300. "Then use it for Penny," she said, her voice serious. "Buy her something nice." He opened his mouth to argue, but she was already out the door, disappearing into the lobby like she'd never been there. He stared after her, speechless. Zayden didn't expect to see her again. But 3 nights later, same hour, same rain, she was standing outside the hotel, waiting like she knew he'd show up. "Hey, stranger," she said as she climbed in. "Drive." He nodded, heart thudding. "Anywhere quiet?" "Anywhere with you," she smiled. That night, they talked more. About everything. About Penny's obsession with tea, Rex plushies. About Celia's love for vintage jazz and her late mother's record collection. He didn't pry into who she really was, and she didn't ask why he was still driving a cab when he clearly had more heart than half the world. It became a pattern. Every other night, she'd be waiting. They talked, they laughed. She met Penny once, briefly, when Mrs. Lowe had to leave early and Zayden had no choice but to bring her along for a short ride. Celia had brought her a stuffed stegosaurus and a warm smile, and Penny had adored her instantly. Still, Zayden never asked what Celia did for a living. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he was scared it would shatter whatever strange, beautiful thing they were building. But then came the night she asked, "Zayden, if told you something crazy, would you hate me?" He looked at her, brow furrowed. "What kind of crazy?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I'm not who you think I am." Zayden half laughed. "You're not secretly a vampire, are you?" She looked away. "I'm not just Celia, I'm Celia Jennings, as in Jennings Corporation, as in Billionaire." His heart dropped. She kept talking. "I didn't lie, I just didn't say it. I needed to be around someone who didn't care about any of that. Someone who saw me, just me." He stared at her, stunned. "Why me?" "Because you look at me like I matter," she said, voice cracking. "Not the money, not the name, just me." Zayden didn't say anything for a long time. Then he whispered, "You matter." The air shifted. And when she leaned forward, slowly, nervously, he met her halfway. Their first kiss was soft, hesitant like two people who didn't know what came next, but knew something real had begun. Neither of them could stop it now. Not when it felt like fate. Zayden pulled up outside the same towering hotel, the street unusually quiet for a Friday night. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the pavement still shimmered with leftover puddles, reflecting the gold-lit entrance of the Fairmont Grand. Celia was already waiting, her arms wrapped around herself, wearing a sleek navy coat that caught the city light like silk. She didn't hesitate this time. She opened the back door and slid in without a word. He studied her face in the mirror. Her expression was unreadable, less guarded, but not quite relaxed. "I was starting to wonder if you'd stop showing up," he said, easing the car into gear. "I almost didn't," she replied, her voice quiet. "But then I remembered I still owe you a story." "You don't owe me anything," Zayden said, glancing at her again. "But if you're offering, I'm listening." She exhaled slowly. "My father built Jennings Corporation from nothing. When he died, I inherited 42% of the company. The rest belongs to a board of men who have been trying to edge me out since his funeral." "That's brutal," he said. "They think I'm soft," she continued. "Because I don't throw chairs or scream in meetings, because I care about people, it scares them. They want control, cold, clean, clinical. I want legacy, purpose." Zayden didn't respond right away. He turned down a narrow street lined with old warehouses, now converted into lofts and candlelit jazz bars. The kind of area where the city whispered instead of shouted. "I think softness gets confused with weakness," he said finally. "But to me, softness means you haven't let the world make you cruel." Celia looked at him, and for the first time that evening, her eyes lit with something like relief. "I met with the board this morning," she said. "They gave me an ultimatum. Either step down quietly, or they'll release some personal photos from years ago, photos that were never meant for anyone but someone I trusted." Zayden's jaw clenched. "Blackmail." "The sanitized, corporate kind," she said, "wrapped in polite threats and legal clauses." He pulled the car into a hidden driveway behind a closed cafe. The outdoor string lights were still on, casting a soft glow over empty tables. He put the car in park, but didn't turn off the engine. "You're seriously considering giving up your stake?" he asked. "If I don't, they'll go after my younger brother next," she said. "He's in rehab, they'll spin it, turn it into a headline. I can take the hit, but he can't." Zayden turned fully to face her now. "So you're going to let them win?" She tilted her head. "I didn't say that. Just haven't figured out how I'm going to make them lose." A beat passed between them. "You know," he said slowly, "I've spent the last couple years just trying to survive. One day at a time, no room for strategy. But you've got fire. I see it." "I hate that they make me doubt it," she whispered. "Then stop letting them," he said. "You're smarter than all of them, you just forgot." She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he admitted, "but it's worth it." They sat in silence for a few moments, the soft hum of the engine filling the space between them. "I want to take you somewhere," she said suddenly. He raised an eyebrow. "Where?" She pulled her phone from her purse and tapped the screen. "There's a gallery opening in 20 minutes. Private, quiet, my friend's the curator. I told him I might stop by." Zayden hesitated. "I'm wearing a faded t-shirt and boots with salt stains." "You're wearing decency and conviction," she said, her voice steady. "That's more than most people in that room." He hesitated again, then finally nodded. "All right, but I'm not carrying a wine glass around pretending to know what brushstrokes mean." Her lips curved. "Deal." The gallery was tucked into an unmarked building in the arts district, behind a row of minimalist sculptures and a frosted glass door. Inside, the space was cool and dimly lit, with pieces that leaned toward the abstract metal twisted into impossible shapes, canvases with broad, emotional strokes. Celia stayed close but gave him space to look. Zayden wandered slowly, pausing at a piece that caught him off guard. A rusted steel sculpture that resembled a heart suspended by threads of copper wire. "Looks like it's barely holding together," he murmured. The curator, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and a silver earring, stepped beside him. "That's exactly the point. The artist made it after a divorce. Said it was about the beauty of surviving something that tried to break you." Zayden nodded once. "Yeah, get that." Celia watched him across the room, her expression unreadable again, but not distant. Afterward, they walked back to the car in silence. This time, she didn't sit in the back. She climbed into the passenger seat beside him. "I've never brought anyone here," she said as he started the engine. "Not even the guy who took those photos?" he asked before he could stop himself. Her eyes flickered. "No, especially not him." They drove for a while without speaking. The city passed by in flashes, neon signs, closed storefronts, a couple dancing under a street lamp like the world had stopped for them. "I have something for you," Celia said, reaching into her coat pocket. Zayden glanced over. "What is it?" She handed him a slim envelope. "It's not money." He opened it at a red light. Inside was a folded slip of paper, a reservation, tomorrow night. La Rêverie, a place he'd only ever seen on TV. The kind where the menu didn't have prices and the wait list was 6 months long. "I can't go there," he said, stunned. "I already spoke to the manager," she replied softly. "They'll have your name. It's not about the food. It's about sitting across from you in a place where people look at me like I belong and I get to decide who belongs with me." He stared at her, unsure what to say. "I want you to come," she added, "as you are, not as someone you think you have to be." The light turned green. He didn't move. "I don't have a suit," he said finally. "I'll take care of it," she said. "Celia." I'm not trying to buy you, Zayden, she interrupted gently. I'm trying to meet you halfway. That silenced him. He started driving again, the streets narrowing as they neared her hotel. When he pulled up to the curb, she didn't move right away. I know this is all backward, she said, but I don't care. I need something real, and I think you do too. He looked at her, and for the first time, he let himself imagine what it might be like her hand in his, at a table surrounded by crystal glasses and white linen, not as a billionaire and a cab driver, but as two people daring to cross a line neither of them had ever stepped over before. I'll be there, he said. She smiled, then stepped out into the night, leaving behind the faint scent of something floral and fierce. Zayden watched her disappear into the lobby. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was just surviving. He felt like he was beginning. The suit fit better than anything Zayden had ever worn. Midnight black, tailored to his frame with a precision that made him feel like someone who belonged in the glowing marble atrium of La Reverie. A note had arrived with it that morning, pinned to the collar. No rules tonight, just you. He'd left Penny with Mrs. Lowe, along with enough puzzles and apple slices to last until sunrise. As he stepped through the revolving door, the scent of saffron and citrus filled the air, and soft piano music drifted from the far corner. He felt every eye glance toward him, but none lingered. In a place like this, people didn't stare. They already believed you had a reason to be there. Celia was already seated. She wore a deep indigo gown that swept the floor like ink spilling in water. Her hair was pulled back, revealing the quiet strength in her jawline. When she looked up and saw him, her expression changed, not surprised, not nervous, but something quieter. As if she'd been holding her breath and finally let it go. You clean up impossibly well, she said as he approached. Zayden sat down across from her, tugging at the cuffs of his sleeves. I'm still half convinced the maitre d' is going to ask for my cab license and throw me out. He wouldn't, she said. He's scared of my friend in Monaco. Zayden raised an eyebrow. Monaco. She picked up her menu, but her eyes stayed on him. We'll save that story for dessert. They ordered something with truffle foam for her, something with seared duck and a name he couldn't pronounce for him. As the waiter disappeared, the tension that had hovered in the space between them began to shift. I thought about canceling, she admitted after a moment. Why didn't you? He asked. Because I wanted tonight to be more than a secret, she said. I wanted you to see me where it come from, where I'm expected to smile and nod and never let anyone see the cracks. So, this is the real Celia. She hesitated. It's one version, but think you've seen more of the real me in your cab than anyone here ever has. Zayden leaned back slightly, studying her. Then, what are we doing here? I needed to know if we could stand in the center of my world and still see each other, she said. Not just meet in the shadows. Their food arrived plates that looked like art more than meals. Zayden tried not to stare at the silverware arrangement or the wine list without numbers. So, she said between bites, tell me something I don't know about you. He wiped his mouth with the cloth napkin, then said, I used to box in high school, state level. My coach thought I'd go pro. What happened? My girlfriend got pregnant, he said simply, and I didn't want to be the guy who left for a dream and missed everything that mattered. Celia's gaze softened. That's not giving up, that's choosing. I didn't always see it that way, he replied. She reached for her glass, pausing before taking a sip. Do you still talk to her? Penny's mom, he asked. No, she left town a few months after Penny was born, said she wasn't built for it. Celia didn't ask more, she didn't need to. All right, he said, changing the subject with a quiet breath. Now you, something I don't know. She tapped her fingers against the stem of her wine glass. I once climbed out of a third-story window to avoid marrying a man my father approved of. Zayden blinked. You what? I was 17. It was a private engagement. We were supposed to make a joint appearance at a fundraiser. I panicked, climbed out the window in heels, landed in a rose bush. He laughed louder than he meant to. A few heads turned. Celia didn't flinch. Did your father forgive you? Eventually, but not before cutting off my cards and sending me to live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens with a cousin I barely knew. Zayden smiled. So you've done the broke thing. For 10 months, it was the best and worst time of my life. They moved through the meal like dancers, finding rhythm, each story leading to another, each silence filled with the weight of something unspoken but understood. When dessert arrived, something golden and delicate with sugared violets, Celia leaned forward, her voice quieter. Zayden, she said, I know this is fast, us, but I don't want to pretend like I'm not falling. He didn't answer right away. He was looking at her the way someone stares at a sunrise after a long night, uncertain if it's real, certain he can't look away. I've spent years building walls, he said. For Penny, for me, but you didn't ask to climb over them. You just stood there until I opened the door. Celia's throat worked around a breath. So where do we go from here? He leaned in, close enough to catch the warmth in her gaze. Wherever you want, I'll drive. Outside, the street was quiet again. She slipped her hand into his as they walked toward the curb, and it fit like it had always belonged there. A black car was waiting, but not one he'd driven. The driver stepped out and opened the door. Zayden hesitated. You don't have to, she said gently. I know, he said, but I want to. He followed her into the car. The ride was silent, not from tension, but from a rare kind of peace, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. When they arrived at her building, she didn't move to get out. Come up, she said. He studied her face. Are you sure? She nodded. I don't want to say goodnight from the sidewalk. The penthouse was nothing like he expected. Warm tones, soft lighting, a record player spinning something slow and aching in the corner. No signs of cold wealth, just elegance with soul. She poured 2 glasses of wine and joined him on the couch. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she whispered, I'm scared. Of what? He asked. Of wanting too much, she said. Of this being real. He set his glass down. It's real. She looked at him, searching for doubt. Whatever she found in his eyes made her lean forward until her lips brushed his. This kiss wasn't hesitant. It wasn't a question. It was an answer. He held her face gently, like he was afraid to break something he couldn't put back together. She rested her hand over his heart, and they stayed like that 2 people who had fought too long to trust quiet things. Neither one said the words yet. But they were already written in every glance, every breath, every second they refused to let the moment end. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Celia's penthouse, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floors and the rumpled throw blanket draped across the edge of the sofa. Zayden sat at the breakfast table, a cup of coffee in his hands, his suit jacket folded neatly over the back of the chair. Across from him, Celia was barefoot, wearing a pale blue robe with her hair loosely tied back, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she scanned her tablet. She looked up suddenly. You're quiet. I'm just taking it in, he said. This place last night, it's a lot to process. Her expression shifted, not uncertain but cautious. Do you regret it? No, he said without hesitation. But I'm wondering what comes next. You live in a world with press releases and board meetings. I drive a cab and still owe $300 on the electric bill. She set the tablet down. I know what world I live in, Zayden. Also know, don't want to go back to pretending it's enough. Before he could respond, her intercom buzzed. She stood and pressed the button on the wall. Yes. Miss Jennings, your assistant is here. She says it's urgent. Celia glanced at Zayden, then pressed the speaker. Send her up. Within minutes, the elevator chimed. A woman in her early 30s, dressed in a charcoal pantsuit, stepped into the room with a tablet in hand and tension in her shoulders. Apologies, she said, but the board has called an emergency meeting. They're moving forward with the vote to remove you. Celia's face didn't change, but something hardened behind her eyes. When? In 2 hours. They've already scheduled the press briefing. Zayden stood slowly. Is there anything you can do to stop it? They're counting on her walking away, the assistant said. They think she won't fight back. They're positioning her brother's addiction as a liability. They're even trying to link it to mismanagement. Celia crossed the room, her voice low but certain. Then we give them something they didn't plan for. The assistant blinked. What? I'm not walking out quietly, Celia said, and I'm not doing it alone. She turned to Zayden. I want you there. He hesitated. Celia, I'm not a lawyer. I don't belong in that room. You belong in my life, she said, and I'm not hiding the most important part of it anymore. The assistant looked between them, uncertain. That'll draw attention. Exactly, Celia said. Let them try to spin it. I'll write the ending. Zayden's jaw tensed. If you're sure. I am. She disappeared into the bedroom and returned 20 minutes later in a slate suit with clean lines and understated jewelry. She looked powerful, not because of the outfit, but because of the choice behind it. Their car arrived outside the Jennings Corporation headquarters, a stark steel building with a mirrored facade that reflected the clouds above. Reporters already stood in clusters along the sidewalk, murmuring as Celia stepped out, Zayden at her side. Inside, the boardroom was polished to perfection. 12 men and 1 woman sat along the curved table, murmuring among themselves until Celia walked in. Miss Jennings, one of them said dryly, we weren't expecting you so promptly. I wasn't expecting you to move forward without a conversation, Celia replied, taking her seat at the head of the table. Zayden remained by the wall, silent but steady. We have reason to believe your personal affairs are interfering with the company's reputation, another board member said. Your brother's situation has already drawn negative attention. I've addressed my brother's recovery publicly, Celia said, and I stand by him. You've also been seen entering and exiting private residences with a man of questionable background, one of the older men said, glancing at Zayden. A taxi driver, we believe. Zayden stepped forward. I'm not here to defend myself. Celia looked at him, but he didn't waver. I'm here because she asked me to be, he continued. And because I've seen what she's capable of, not from behind a desk, but from the way she listens, the way she leads, and the way she doesn't give up on people. The room fell silent. Celia stood. I've spent years earning the right to sit at this table, not because of my name, but because I built teams that made this company stronger. I've negotiated deals you couldn't. I've saved you from lawsuits you were too arrogant to see coming. And now, because I chose to love someone who isn't from your world, you want me gone. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. This isn't personal. It's entirely personal, she interrupted. But if we're going to make this personal, let's do it properly. I have a formal motion prepared. Effective immediately, I'm launching a countermeasure. The assistant, who had quietly entered behind them, handed out packets. I'm calling for a shareholder vote to restructure the board, Celia said. I've already secured backing from the Leighton Group, the Havers Consortium, and the Reeves Trust. Collectively, that gives me controlling interest. Gasps erupted around the table. You thought I'd walk away quietly, she said. Instead, I walked into every room you thought I didn't belong in and built alliances while you plotted in shadows. One board member stood, his face pale. You can't do this. I just did. The meeting dissolved into chaos, but Celia didn't flinch. She turned, took Zayden's hand, and walked out. Outside, the press swarmed. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted questions about the man at her side. Celia paused on the marble steps, turned toward the reporters, and raised her voice. "This is Zayden Novik," she said. "He's not just a taxi driver, he's a father. He's the most honest, grounded man I've ever met. And yes, I'm in love with him." Zayden's breath caught. Celia looked up at him, her voice quieter. "I didn't plan for this, but I'm not letting it go." He pulled her closer, and without another word, kissed her in front of the cameras, the board, the world. It wasn't for show. It was a promise. Later that night, back in the warmth of her penthouse, Zayden stood by the window while Penny played with Celia's dog in the corner, her laughter filling the space like music. Celia stepped beside him. "Do you ever think about what life would have looked like if you hadn't picked me up that night?" He smiled. "Try not to. I don't like the idea of missing this." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Neither do I." He turned to her, and for the first time there was no hesitation. "I love you." Her eyes met his, no fear, only truth. "I love you too." No more secrets. No more rooms they didn't belong in. Just one life shared, earned, real. The scent of lavender and honey filled the room as Penny giggled from the hallway, stomping through the penthouse in mismatched socks and a glittery paper crown Celia had helped her make. Zayden adjusted the collar of his crisp white shirt, watching the two most important people in his life with a kind of wonder he hadn't known he was allowed to feel. "Dad, I'm a queen and you're a dragon," Penny announced, her hands on her hips. "Celia's the nice witch who makes cookies." Celia glanced up from the kitchen counter, where cookie dough was smeared across her cheek. "I've never had a better title." Zayden chuckled. "As long as the dragon gets chocolate chip, I'll play along." "You get one cookie if you roar," Penny replied, utterly serious. He let out a dramatic growl, making her shriek with laughter. Celia wiped her hands and stepped closer, brushing flour off his shoulder. "You've got a little dragon dust on you." "I think I've got a little everything on me these days." He looked at her. "But I wouldn't trade it." She moved her hand to his chest, right over his heart. "Neither would I." It had been 3 weeks since the board fallout. Celia had finalized the restructuring, stepping into her new role with quiet ferocity. The media had eaten up the story a billionaire heiress choosing love over legacy, only to reclaim both with a man no one saw coming. But Celia refused interviews, letting her actions speak louder than any headline. Zayden had stopped driving the cab. At first, it was uncomfortable, like shedding a second skin, but Celia never pressured him. Instead, she'd introduced him to a friend who ran a community development initiative in the Bronx, and within days, Zayden was helping manage a new youth boxing program. He came alive in that gym. It wasn't about money or power, it was about purpose. And for the first time in years, he had both. Later that evening, Penny snuggled into her blanket fort in the guest room, head buried in a book, while Zayden and Celia sat out on the balcony, sipping tea as the skyline shimmered in the distance. "You know," he said, "I used to think the world was split in two. People who had everything and people who had to fight for scraps. What do you think now?" He tilted his head. "I think the world's full of people who are just trying. Some have more tools, some get more chances. But it's the ones who stop pretending and start choosing that change things." Celia turned toward him, her legs tucked beneath her. "I was terrified, you know, of what I'd lose if I let myself love you out loud." "You lost nothing," he said. "You found everything." She nodded slowly. "I used to think strength was about never needing anyone. Now I know it's about letting someone in and trusting they won't run when it gets hard." Zayden reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, square box. His hands didn't shake, he was past nerves. There was only certainty now. "I've been carrying this around for a week," he said. waiting for the right moment. Celia's breath caught, but she didn't speak. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single sapphire surrounded by tiny white diamonds. No flash, no performance, just beauty and truth. "I don't need a mansion or a company or a title," he said, "but I want a life, with you, with Penny, with whatever comes next. Will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate, she didn't cry. She leaned forward, pressed her forehead to his, and whispered, "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and they sat there for a moment, the city humming softly around them, a promise sealed not with noise, but with stillness. 2 days later, they stood at the top of a rooftop garden in Brooklyn, surrounded by string lights and people who mattered. Penny held a basket of rose petals, tossing them with dramatic flair. "Mrs." Lowe dabbed her eyes beside a man from the gym who'd once served 3 tours and now taught the kids discipline and chess. There were no tuxedos, no cameras, just Celia in a tea-length ivory dress and Zayden in a navy suit, his tie crooked, his smile wide. The vows were their own, honest and unpolished. "I promise to never let you forget your worth," she said, "even when the world tries to." "And I promise," he said, "to love you without armor, without conditions, just you." When they kissed, Penny cheered loudest. That night, they danced barefoot under the stars. Zayden twirled Celia as the music played, and she laughed, head thrown back, the city below them glowing like it was celebrating too. Much later, when the guests had gone and Penny was asleep in Celia's old childhood bed they'd brought from storage, they sat together in the quiet living room of their new home, a brownstone in Park Slope they'd purchased together. "We did it," Celia said softly, tracing her fingers along his. "No," Zayden said, kissing her shoulder. "We're just getting started." And they were. They built a life that combined her world and his, not by changing who they were, but by building something new. Celia launched a foundation that funded community programs in underrepresented neighborhoods. Zayden expanded his gym work, mentoring kids who reminded him of himself at 15, angry, talented, and waiting for a lifeline. They never tried to be perfect. They just tried. On Sunday mornings, they made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. On Tuesday nights, they curled up on the couch with Penny between them, watching old musicals and arguing about which one had the best dance number. And every night, before the lights went out, Zayden would pull Celia close and whisper something he hadn't known he'd one day believe again. That he was lucky. That he was loved. That he was home. Always.